Before the unraveling that transformed my life, my days were defined by simplicity. I grew up in a small town where summers were spent with my friends playing pickup games and winters involved skating on frozen ponds. College shifted that routine into a fast-paced blur of classes, parties, and ambitious dreams. It was during this transformative time that I met Lee, a radiant, confident young woman who captured my attention from the moment I laid eyes on her. We connected over shared study sessions and spontaneous conversations, gradually intertwining our lives until the thought of separation seemed impossible. Our connection matured, filled with equal parts affection and shared challenges. Marriage followed soon after graduation, a seamless step forward. Life had its pressures, but we found a rhythm that worked. I balanced my role as a government contractor with creative side projects, while Lee climbed the ladder in public relations. Our twin daughters, Betsy and Linda, became the focal point of our days, solidifying our bond as parents. One ordinary evening, my quiet world shifted. I stayed up late, engrossed in a series of YouTube videos on my laptop. To the right, an assortment of cued clips awaited autoplay. I watched a highlight reel featuring one of my favorite basketball stars, Larry Big Al Johnson, who had a reputation for stunning last-second plays. His long, blonde hair, swept back in a ponytail, gave him a charismatic presence, akin to a movie idol. Big Al had been part of my college memories, a familiar face on campus, and later a pro drafted by the Wizards, the local team I followed closely. Though he had retired 3 years ago to become a sports presenter, his legacy was a mix of admiration and nostalgia for me. The next video had nothing to do with basketball. It was a news clip of Big Al dancing sensually with a stunning blonde in a Miami club, my wife Lee. The clip ended with them in a deep kiss. It had been filmed an hour ago and just posted under the headline, "Big Al, Another Conquest." I downloaded it and called Lee, but she didn't answer. She was supposedly at a work conference in Miami, along with Bart Kovach, a friend of mine. I called Bart, and he answered immediately. "Bart, it's Marty. Do you know where Lee is right now?" I asked. There was a brief pause before Bart replied, "Marty, this is bad. She's with Big Al." "Bart, I need details. This video is going viral, and by morning, everyone, including my kids, will have seen it." "Has she been with him this whole time?" I pressed. "They've been here for 3 days and are leaving tomorrow. They hit it off right after we arrived, probably reconnecting from college. She attends the meetings during the day, but she hasn't been staying in her room at night." "I'm really sorry, Marty," Bart said. "Will you see her in the morning?" I asked. "She's supposed to catch a flight. I'll see if she shows up, but I doubt she will," Bart replied. "If she plans on coming home, tell her not to," I said firmly. "I'll let her know if she asks," Bart said. "Thanks, Bart. Goodbye." Lee and I met in college during our junior year in a math class. On the first day, I noticed her sketching alone, surrounded by shy guys. I took the seat next to her. She looked up, smirked, and said, "Smart choice." I introduced myself. "I'm Lee Moore." "I'm Lee Martin," she replied, smiling. "If we get married, no need to change monograms." We laughed as class began. After class, we walked to the student union. She had striking green eyes, blonde hair, and an easy smile. She joked about being surprised no one sat beside her and mentioned usually having to fend guys off. "I have a boyfriend, though," she added, cutting off any ideas. We met twice a week for class, and one day I asked her for help with a problem. She agreed to tutor me at a diner on Noyes Street, setting boundaries due to her boyfriend. "Deal," I said, grateful. During our study sessions at the diner, I got to know Lee much better. Our conversations naturally drifted beyond math, and we quickly found a connection. One day, while our table was cluttered with textbooks, a tall, broad-shouldered man approached. Lee glanced up and greeted him with her radiant smile. "Marty, this is my boyfriend, Rashad." "Rashad, meet Marty from my math class," she said. I stood up and extended my hand. Rashad, who was black, stood about 5'8" inches with a medium build, weighing around 220 pounds. He shook my hand firmly and sat down next to Lee. We put our books aside as Rashad looked at me and asked, "So, what brings you to this math class with Lee and the other nerds?" "I need an advanced math course for my chemistry major," I explained. "It's also useful for programming." The three of us started chatting about why different majors often require seemingly unrelated courses. The conversation was lively, and I quickly realized Rashad was sharp and engaging. "So what are you studying?" I asked him. "Physical training," Rashad replied. "I play hockey, but my backup plan is to teach high school. Ideally, I'd like to become a PE teacher." "Good plan," I said. "Better than mine. Chemists and programmers do get hired, but I'm not quite sure by whom yet." Rashad chuckled. And what about you, Lee? I'm studying business, she said, a confident smile crossing her face. I like the idea of making money. As the semester went on, I spent more time with Lee. I had an off-campus apartment and invited her and Rashad over for dinner one evening. Rashad brought his neighbor Stephanie, who was gorgeous and had just finished high school. She and I had a casual friends with benefits relationship. The dinner went well. I made fish stew, spinach salad, and we had cookies and ice cream. The women drank wine while Rashad and I had beer. Lee and Rashad left around midnight after we played bridge. All four of us surprisingly enjoyed it. None of us had partnered up before, but it got competitive. Rashad and Stephanie teamed up, while Lee and I were on the other team. Lee had a unique bidding style that I picked up on, and we managed to pull ahead and win. Stephanie stayed the night. She was beautiful and passionate, but we both knew our relationship was just casual. She had a boyfriend back in her hometown. I never asked what he thought about us. That evening turned out to be significant because Lee asked me to join a backup bridge tournament at the Army base. I agreed. Meanwhile, Stephanie somehow got Rashad's phone number, probably at dinner without me noticing. I saw them together 2 days later, walking across campus toward our building. I followed them briefly as they went inside and got in the elevator, which stopped at the 4th floor, where she lived. I wasn't sure what to do. The bridge tournament took place on Friday. 2 days later, I was in my room by the window, reading and watching the activity outside. After a couple of hours, I noticed Rashad leaving through the front door. I decided to walk over to Stephanie's room and knocked. She shouted something before opening the door a moment later. She looked flushed, wearing flip-flops and a tight dress with no bra. "Hey, Steph," I said. "Not now, Marty. I'm not in the mood for company," she replied sharply. Then her expression shifted. "Oh, Marty, you saw it, didn't you?" "Yeah," I admitted. She gave a wry smile. "Well, did you enjoy the show? It might seem wrong on Shad's part, but I don't feel bad. I actually feel great." "Sorry," I said, feeling awkward. "Don't worry about it. I'm figuring out what to do next," she continued. "Just don't mess things up between Lee and Rashad. He's just fun for me like you are. Honestly, not even as much as you. If you were in Lee's shoes, would you want to know if Rashad messed up?" "Yes," I said. "Me too," she replied. The bridge tournament turned out to be a lot of fun. The Army team was impressive at cards, but Lee and I managed to place 3rd out of 20 teams. Not bad at all. Lee mentioned we'd earned points, though I wasn't sure what that meant. As we walked to my car, she suddenly asked, "Why didn't you tell me about Rashad and Steph?" I couldn't decide whether I should. "How did you find out?" I asked. "Steph told Rashad that you knew. He brought it up," she explained. "I'm sorry. I got curious and ended up seeing them." "What did they say?" Lee asked. "We're taking a break for a few weeks to figure things out," I said. "Oh, okay," she replied. Then she looked at me and said, "Marty, I want you to take me to your place. If you want to, that is." "Oh, I definitely want to," I answered. I drove faster than usual to my apartment. We hurried inside, and once the door closed, Lee kissed me deeply. She pressed her body against mine, and I responded by pressing my arousal against her. She pulled back, grabbed me, and led me to the bedroom. I quickly removed my shirt and pants, including my underwear. Lee was already undressed except for her underwear and sandals. I knelt down and slid her underwear off slowly. Sex with Lee was incredible. I brought her to climax twice, and the 3rd time we finished together. Oh, Marty, oh my God. I believed her. I'd always thought we were meant for each other. I'm average-sized in pants. Maybe a bit more, but I focused on pleasing her, which worked well that night. Lee rested for a bit, then started exciting me again. I returned the favor, and it worked perfectly. She climaxed strongly, and I followed soon after. We lay there for 20 minutes, gently caressing each other. I got up to use the bathroom. She followed. "Shower?" she asked in a sultry voice. We took a long shower where I pressed her against the smooth wall and made love to her. Afterward, we cleaned up and returned to bed, eventually falling asleep. The next morning, I got up to brush my teeth, and Lee came in just as I was finishing. I handed her a spare toothbrush. Once we both took care of my morning breath, we addressed my morning arousal. During breakfast, Lee asked, "Am I as good as Stephanie? Am I as good as Shad?" We looked at each other, then she smirked. "He's bigger, but you're better. Steph is great, but you're amazing." From that day forward, we were together. Lee practically moved in with me. Rashad was against it, but there wasn't much he could do. He soon found someone else and often spent time with Stephanie, too. In his senior year, Big Al moved into our building on the 4th floor. Sometimes I saw him with Stephanie. He didn't live with her, but they were frequently spotted coming and going together. We exchanged greetings until one evening Steph invited us over for dessert. Big Al was there. It was a pleasant evening, and I found Big Al polite, intelligent, and maybe overly attentive to Lee. Perhaps Steph noticed too, as we weren't invited over again. Lee and I got married at 20. Right after college, I started working as a programmer for the government at the Pentagon. Lee got a job at a public relations firm, focusing on advertising for corporations aiming to influence government officials, senators, congressmen, and agency reps. I inherited a house from my grandfather, located close to work. The lease had ended, so we moved in. The house had 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a garage converted into a living space, and a finished basement, which needed some work. I tackled that project with the help of a high school friend who ran a construction business in Virginia. Lee became pregnant, and at 22, we welcomed twin daughters, Betsy and Linda. Not identical, but quite a handful. Lee took a year off, and I reduced my work hours to give the twins the care they needed. By the end of that year, I switched to contractor status, allowing me to work from home. Lee returned to work part-time and went full-time when the girls turned 4. By then, I had established a solid daily routine with them, and my contractor work was thriving. I earned more, though without benefits. Lee's job grew increasingly demanding, mostly because she allowed it to. She was ambitious and accomplished a lot. My work was more creative. Some of it was for the government, while some was my own. I had 2 promising system ideas that I'd been refining for a while. Lee made good money. When the girls were 13 and in elementary school, I was 35 and in good shape. I jogged and played table tennis, which might not sound challenging, but try it against skilled players. Before seeing the video of Lee and Big Al, I would have said our bed life was satisfying, at least for me. However, after 15 years together, while I didn't think we were stagnant, I suspected Lee did. I looked up Big Al's address, just 3 miles north of us. I wondered if what I saw in Miami was recent or had been going on for a while. I also had more questions. I asked the girls to do DNA swabs, and I did one myself. This was the day after I told them about the YouTube video. I needed to protect them from any surprises at school. It was Friday, and they had school with tests and group activities. At 10 a.m., Lee called. I saw it was her and let it go to voicemail. "Marty, pick up. Please, Marty. I love you. I made a mistake. I'll be home this afternoon." "Oh, God." Her sobs were audible. One of the house improvements I made was an electronic entry system, so I changed the code. The converted garage stood unused but was fully furnished. I moved Lee's clothes and essentials there. My mother and Lee's mother both called, wanting to know what I planned to do. I didn't know and said as much. I logged into Lee's Gmail and went through a month of emails, old and recent. I checked the trash folder, no messages from Big Al. There were some work-related emails and a few about the conference, with hints from a coworker who was also headed to Miami. Lee's flight was due at noon. I ignored her calls and asked a friend at the airport to keep an eye on arrivals. He saw Lee exit with her work group looking around. He discreetly filmed her on his phone as she collected her luggage and lingered by the exit. 5 minutes later, Big Al appeared, also scanning the area and heading for the baggage claim. My friend followed him. Lee, holding her suitcase, noticed Big Al, turned, and walked away. Big Al retrieved his suitcase and went outside. Lee was waiting for a cab when Big Al approached her and spoke. She shook her head. A taxi arrived and the dispatcher directed both into it. My friend sent me the video. 20 minutes later, a taxi pulled up in front of the house. Only Lee stepped out, looking frantic when she realized her code no longer worked. She knocked and rang the doorbell repeatedly. I opened the door and she burst into tears. "I'm so sorry, Marty. I never imagined things would turn into such a mess," she sobbed. "You don't live here anymore, Lee. Your things are in the garage. Until you find a place, maybe you should stay with Al," I said coldly. "Oh, Marty, there's nothing between us. I love you," she pleaded. "You publicly humiliated me and made me a laughingstock. The girls at school, who knows what they're going through because of this? You're cruel. Get out of my sight." Her face fell as she stumbled backward. She sat down on a lawn chair and cried. Our neighbor, Mrs. Cunningham, noticed and came over to talk to her. After their conversation, Lee went to Mrs. Cunningham's house. I called Lee's mother and let her know Lee was nearby and could use some support. Ellen, her mother, sounded indifferent, but agreed to come by in an hour. I sat in the kitchen sipping coffee, trying to process everything. The events of the night before felt like a blur. I called an attorney I knew who referred me to family law attorney Joan Ellis. I scheduled an appointment for Monday, but 30 minutes later, Miss Ellis called me back. Mr. Martin, this is Joan Ellis. You set an appointment for Monday, correct? I'm calling because of your wife and the basketball player? Yes, but how did you know? The video doesn't mention her name, I said, surprised. A reporter uncovered it. Big Al is big news here, especially when it comes to gossip. I thought it would be best not to wait until Monday. Can you come tomorrow morning at 10? Yes, 10 works, I replied. Please write a brief history of your relationship with your wife and any interactions with Mr. Johnson, if any. I'll also need financial statements, if possible, she instructed. We ended the call, and she advised against making any rash decisions. I hung up, and my phone rang again. Without thinking, I answered. It was Big Al. Marty, I called to apologize, he said. Go to hell. I'll do everything I can to ruin your life, you idiot, I snapped. Listen, it's not just me. It's her too. It just happened, he said, trying to defend himself. I had a happy marriage before she went to Miami. We have 2 kids. You're a fool. If you see me, you better run. I said it calmly, with no raised voice or emphasis. There was a pause, and he hung up. Now I had his number. I logged into our shared phone account and checked Lee's call history. I saw Al's number appear only after she reached Miami, just twice. I didn't have access to today's calls. I assumed their meeting was unplanned. I checked Wiz's schedule. They'd had a game in Miami on Wednesday where Big Al was the MC, confirming he was there for work. The doorbell rang. My parents and Lee's parents were outside. Lee was gone. I let them in and offered drinks, which they declined. They sat down while I stood at the living room entrance. Well, I prompted. My mom, Lacey, spoke up. We had a quick talk outside. We came to see how you're holding up. I sat there, quietly sobbing, my grief evident. When I finally straightened up and looked at my mom, she later said my expression was so full of devastation and pain that she couldn't fathom how it could ever be healed. My dad spoke up. Is there any chance you'd be willing to talk to Lee? She asked us to check. Why? I replied bitterly. Nothing she says will matter. She destroyed our family. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. She didn't even try to hide it from her co-workers, and now everyone knows. Ellen, Lee's mother, intervened. I know she made a terrible mistake, Marty. A huge one. And she realizes that. But you have your daughters, and you and Lee have shared so many years together. Maybe it's worth trying to save if you can. I don't see her as my wife anymore, Ellen. And I never will again. She's just the mother of my children now. Ellen's eyes softened with empathy. You're hurting, Marty. Your pride is deeply wounded. You need time to move past that. Your marriage can't end because of just a few days. Ellen, I care about you and respect you, but what your daughter did is beyond repair. Please, don't ask me to consider reconciliation. It's not going to happen, I said firmly. She raised her hands in a silent gesture. I added, all of you should start thinking about what life will look like after the divorce or once it's official. My mom started crying. Just wait a few days, Marty, just a few. Your dad and I can take the girls for the weekend. We'll take them to the lake, I agreed. Just then, the girls arrived home from school and knocked because the code had changed. They were surprised to see their grandparents. They wanted to tell me about their day. It wasn't all that bad, I said. Betsy was close friends with Sharon Davis, who asked her about the video. Betsy admitted she hadn't seen it, but was aware of it. Sharon wanted to know if her parents were getting a divorce. Betsy said she didn't know. Linda didn't know either, but I did. We'll handle this later, I said. They weren't overly emotional. Linda asked, Where's Mom? She's next door, Ellen replied. Your grandparents need to talk to your dad, but I think you girls should pack for the weekend. You'll be staying with us and we'll take you to the lake. They were worried, but wanted to see Lee. We sent them to pack. I was against them seeing Lee, but the others thought it was necessary. I said she could see the girls on the porch, I insisted. After they packed, Ellen went to get Lee. Their suitcases were put in the car and they waited on the porch with their grandparents. Lee and Ellen approached. The girls didn't run to her, but stood waiting. From my bedroom window on the second floor, I could see and hear everything. Lee knelt in front of them and they all hugged. Mom? Linda asked with a trembling voice. What did you do? How could you be with that man? She sobbed through the question. I made a terrible mistake, Lee whispered. I need to figure out why. But I love you girls and your dad very much. Betsy wasn't convinced. She was the tougher one. If you loved Dad, you couldn't have done this. And it's all over the video. How could you? She cried, tears streaming down her face. Lee started crying too. "I'm so sorry, it was a terrible mistake." Lee hugged Linda while Betsy pushed her away. Lee stood up and ran to her father's car. My parents put the girls in their van and everyone went their separate ways. I sat on my bed, stunned and heartbroken. Then anger surged within me. I felt rage building and started shouting and thrashing. I went down to the basement and pounded on the heavy bag, imagining every hit landing on Larry or Lee. My hands turned sore and bruised by the time I was done. I resolved that both of them would face consequences. After tending to my injured hands, I had a drink and went to bed. It took a while to fall asleep, but I finally did. The next morning, I went for an intense, long run. Then I gathered my financial documents and went to the lawyer's office. Joan Ellis was a slender woman in her 40s with dark hair and eyes, dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt. We shook hands. "Sorry for the casual look. It's Saturday, and I was doing yard work," she said. "No problem. You look fine," I replied. She smiled. "Let's head to the conference room," she said, leading the way. I began, "Miss Ellis, I want to understand my options for divorcing my wife." "I can explain that, but are you sure you want a divorce? It's a difficult path and you have 2 kids, right?" she asked. "Yes, twin girls, 13 years old, and I want custody," I said firmly. "Let's circle back to whether you really want to end your marriage. Has something like Miami happened before, or is this a first?" she probed. "I don't think she's done this before, but I can't be certain," I answered. "So you can't accept it if it's true?" she asked. "No," I said without hesitation. "Okay, let's talk about finances," Joan said. We discussed our incomes and roles with the children. Joan was pleased that the house belonged to me before marriage and that the girls had always lived there. She felt our work schedules and my role as a stay-at-home parent would likely favor me in custody proceedings, though nothing was guaranteed. I made about the same amount as Lee, but my income was less consistent. Joan thought neither of us would be required to pay child support. "The non-custodial parent will be obligated to pay child support," she clarified. I asked how soon the divorce process could begin. "Maybe a week to draft and file the paperwork," she estimated. "I think you should wait a bit longer. People change their minds, and you might be ordered to attend counseling," she advised. "Is there any way to avoid that? I don't want to talk to her one-on-one," I said. "You'll need to have some conversations, but we can try to minimize them," she replied. She noticed my bandaged hands. "What happened?" she asked. "I got angry last night and took it out on the heavy bag. Forgot my gloves," I admitted. "At least you didn't confront Mr. Johnson or your wife," she remarked. "Speaking of him, is there any way to sue him? He should pay," I said, my tone hardening. "There's no option to sue for infidelity or alienation of affection in this state or in Florida," Joan explained. "He should pay," I muttered, my voice steady, which seemed to unnerve Joan. "I'll see what can be done, but please, no violence," she cautioned. "No promises. He has to face consequences. I won't sleep if he walks away without any," I replied. "Mr. Martin, I need to tell you that while our discussions are confidential, if I believe you're planning a violent act, I may need to report it," she said. "Or maybe not," I said. "Joan, you'll never have that kind of knowledge," I assured her. "Thanks for saying that," she said, sounding relieved. I signed an agreement with her and paid the fee, asking her to have the documents ready as soon as possible. When I got home, it was already noon, and my father, Leland, called. "Hello? How are you holding up today?" he asked. "I'm fine. I just got back from seeing a lawyer," I replied. "Oh, moving fast. What did they say?" he asked, a note of concern in his voice. "We discussed what a divorce would look like," I said bluntly. "Marty, you need to take a step back. Don't rush this. It's a major decision and you shouldn't make it hastily," he cautioned. "Dad, when Lee let that guy touch her, she was already done in my mind. The fact that it happened more than once just makes it worse. But once was enough," I said, my tone hardening. "Your mother thinks she hurt you too deeply for any chance of recovery. I think she might be right, but still I want you to slow down and give Lee a chance to explain," he said, his voice softening. "What could she possibly say that would change anything?" I asked. There was a pause before he admitted, "Okay, I can't think of anything." "Exactly my point," I said. We talked about how the girls were feeling. Linda was sad and withdrawn, while Betsy was angry and struggling to keep her emotions in check. My mom was working with them, reassuring them that they weren't losing their parents and that both of us would still be there for them. We ended the call. The house phone rang with no caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. It was Lee. "Marty, if you're there, please pick up. I need to talk to you. Marty, I need this. Please, I know I messed up. You're the only one I've ever been able to talk to about serious things. Am I going to lose you? No, please. I know you're angry and confused. I'm so sorry." She started crying before hanging up. As she spoke, I found myself crying too. I went downstairs again, this time putting on gloves before hitting the bag. Even with gloves, it hurt. I punched and kicked the bag until I was exhausted. Afterward, I took a shower. Some guys might drink in a situation like this, but I preferred to run or use the punching bag. I began thinking about how to deal with Larry. One thing that kept coming to mind was a tool I had found. I owned 2 registered pistols, a .45 caliber revolver and a .40 caliber S&W pistol. But one day, while jogging, I noticed something shiny in the tall grass. It was a Taurus .380 self-loading pistol. I took it home. It was loaded and in working condition, though the serial number had been removed, making it illegal. I cleaned it and once tested it at a shooting range. It was accurate. I considered the idea of using the tool on Larry, but quickly pushed those thoughts aside. I had my girls, and I couldn't risk ending up in prison because of him. It wasn't the right time to confront Lee. I knew eventually we'd have to talk, but the idea of seeing her now made me feel sick. Alone in the house, a wave of despair washed over me. It felt like a heavy blanket suffocating me, pinning me to the couch. Breathing became difficult and suddenly panic set in. I jumped up knowing I needed to move and went for a fast walk. My path led me by Larry's house. I didn't linger but noted that security seemed minimal. The house was large and new, close to the street with a basketball hoop in the driveway. No car was in sight, but there was a large garage in the back. I walked by, made a loop, and passed again, discreetly taking a few photos with my phone. I then walked past Lee's parents' house further north. Their cars were parked out front, and Lee's car was still in our garage. I hurried to a store, bought a prepaid cell phone and a Diet Pepsi, and then returned home. It was 3 p.m. on a Saturday. I made a sandwich, though I only managed to eat a few bites. The moment I stopped moving, the despair crept back. I took out the .380 pistol and drove out of town to a friend's property with an open shooting range. No one was there. He and his family were in Florida. I shot through 2 boxes of ammo. The pistol was cheap but reliable, slightly heavier than a high-end model. On my way back, I stopped at a pharmacy and picked up 2 neoprene thigh wraps. Back at home, I fashioned a body holster to hold the .380 at my lower back. I tested running with it and found it worked well. My phone had been off all day, and I hadn't checked emails. When I turned it on, there were 11 voicemails, around 20 texts from family, colleagues, and friends, and countless emails. The voicemails were from Lee, Ellen, and my mom, all saying similar things. "Please contact us. We need to talk." The texts echoed the same, including some from my father and 2 recent ones from Lee's father, Milt. Milt's messages stood out from the rest. In the first, he apologized for Lee's actions and expressed regret for not raising a more responsible daughter. In the second, he asked if I wanted to meet and talk privately, away from the women. I called him, but it went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message, but he called back 3 minutes later. "Marty, I needed a walk to clear my head. I saw you called. What's going on?" he asked. "Milt, can we meet somewhere?" "How about Raymond Park near Hopscourt?" I suggested. "Sure, I can be there in about 30 minutes, he agreed. I put on jeans and slipped my .380 into my pocket, just in case I encountered Larry, who lived half a mile from the park. I drove for 10 minutes and walked past Larry's house on the way. When I arrived, Milt was already there. The park was small and quiet, with only a few people around. We shook hands and sat on a bench near the edge of the court. Milt spoke first. "I wanted to check on you. Ellen and your mom told me you weren't doing well." "I'm not, Milt. I feel worse than I ever have," I admitted. "I understand. When my mom died, it took me a year to feel somewhat normal again. I just worked through it day by day. You should try to do the same," he said gently. "It's easy to say, but hard to do. And it's only been a day," I replied. "For what it's worth, Lee isn't holding up well either. She hasn't eaten since she came to our house and has barely spoken. We're thinking of calling for help. Honestly, you look better than she does," Milt said. "She's dealing with guilt. I don't have that," I said flatly. "I'm sorry, Marty, but the girls need her. They need their mother. I don't understand why she's so shocked by this fallout. She did everything openly. Did she really think no one would find out? That I wouldn't know? It's ridiculous. Even without YouTube, one of her coworkers or friends would have mentioned it eventually. I said, frustration seeping into my voice. I don't think she was thinking clearly, Milt said thoughtfully. She was away from home, caught up in being pursued by a celebrity. I think she let emotions take over when she would normally suppress them. You're kind to think that, Milt. But I believe she's had feelings for Larry since college and thought she could have both. What are you planning to do? He asked. I'm probably going to divorce her. I can't think about her without getting angry. I just hope I don't end up sick over this, I said. I know people are advising you to wait before making any big decisions. But honestly, I don't see how you could return to a normal life with her, Milt said, his voice heavy. Exactly. It's over. I'll wait, but not for long, I replied. Make sure she's prepared. If she's as bad as you say, I'll do what I can to help, Milt offered. We parted ways. As I walked back to my car, parked on a nearby street, I saw Larry dribbling a basketball up the cross street toward the park. My hand moved to my tool. Milt, driving past, saw him and honked. Larry got startled, lost the ball, and chased after it without looking, like an idiot. It wasn't Milt who ran over him. A car coming from the opposite direction, blocked by Milt's, struck him. A big SUV. Before the driver could stop, Larry went over the hood and windshield, landing on the street. Milt kept driving. I ran over to Larry, who was still alive but barely conscious. The SUV driver rushed over, yelling, I already called emergency. The hospital was only about 4 blocks away. Larry recognized me and tried to speak, but no words came out. I watched as he faded. Paramedics arrived within 2 minutes, doing everything they could, but it was too late. Big Al was gone. I felt a mix of relief and betrayal. The police showed up, and I was anxious since the tool I had was illegal, even though I had a concealed carry permit. I answered their questions, gave my name and address, and they let me go. The elderly SUV driver was shaken, and I told him and the police that it wasn't his fault. Larry had just run into the street. An hour later, I drove home, disposed of the .380, and went to Milt's. Lee was there, but I needed to speak to Milt about the accident. Ellen opened the door, noticing my tense expression. Marty, what's wrong? She asked. I need to see Milt, I replied. Milt, she called out, and he came down. I motioned for him to step outside. Big Al is dead, I said. Milt's eyes widened. Did you liquidate him? I saw the tool, Marty. No, he was shot by a car after you honked. He chased a ball into the street. I saw him die. Milt looked shocked. That's an accident. God works in mysterious ways, he said. I managed a grim smile. One of you, either you or Ellen, should tell Lee that her lover is gone. He wasn't her lover, Milt said defensively. But we'll tell her. It'll be on the news soon. How is she doing? I asked. She's not well. She's shattered, Milt replied, his voice heavy. It's strange, I said. At first I felt cheated, but now I just feel relieved. Marty, I want to save my daughter, Milt said, his eyes pleading. She made a huge mistake, but she deserves a chance. If you can find it in yourself, please help her someday. I know it's a lot to ask. I need time, Milt. For now, keep her away from me. I'll try to figure things out, I said, my tone firm. Good job not becoming a butcher, Milt said with a slight smile. We shared a tense laugh and went inside. I drove home and for the first time in days, slept well. The girls called and we talked before bedtime. Sunday was tough. The weather was nice, but I had nothing to distract me from my broken marriage. Despite Milt's words, I knew there was no future for Lee and me. This truth saddened me, but it was reality. I went for a long run by the river, then showered and joined my parents and the girls for a picnic. The twins were in better spirits. They had a video call with Lee, who encouraged them, staying strong. My mom said they only talked about school, avoiding Lee's affair and Larry's end of life. Lee told them she'd see them once she felt better. We enjoyed the day, and while the girls were swimming, I shared with my parents that I had witnessed Larry's accident. They were stunned. You didn't have anything to do with it, did you? My father asked, eyeing me cautiously. No, it was purely a coincidence, I assured him. I was at the park with Milt when Larry ran into the street. Well, I can't say I'm sorry to hear that, my father muttered. May the Lord have mercy on him. We changed the subject. On Monday, Joan Ellis called, unaware I'd been there when Larry died. I explained everything, sensing her amazement and slight suspicion. I understood. It sounded strange. She said the divorce papers would be ready by Wednesday and asked when to serve them. Hold off, I said. Lee's not in good shape. I promised Milt I'd wait. The girls chose to attend school, even though Larry's end of life and last week's outburst were big news. I managed a half day of work for the Army before picking them up after activities. We had homemade pizza for dinner. It was a pleasant evening, but before bed, they asked, Will Mom come back? I don't think things will be the same, I said honestly. I can't see us going back to our old life, but your mom and I will always love you. On Tuesday, Milt and Ellen called, asking to meet at Starbucks. With coffee in hand, Milt said he'd contacted a marriage counselor and asked me to try engaging with Lee. If you file for divorce on infidelity grounds, the court may require counseling, Ellen added. Fine, but I won't fake it. This might not help her, I said. We're not asking you to pretend, Ellen replied. Just take it slow. Listen and talk to Lee. She's terrified after Larry's end of life. We didn't tell her you were there. Our first counseling session was set for Monday at 10 a.m. I arrived on time to avoid waiting with Lee. The counselor, Dr. Sylvia Price, was a warm, welcoming psychologist in her 50s. She led us into her office. Lee and I hadn't spoken until then. She looked pale and nervous. Dr. Price began by explaining her work, including cases involving infidelity. She asked me, Marty, what's your goal for counseling? I want to move forward with my life, I said. I want to be a good father, but I don't see reconciliation happening. Turning to Lee, Dr. Price asked, what about your goals? Lee hesitated. I want my old life back. Even if it's different, I want to stay married. Dr. Price summarized. Lee attended a conference in Miami, reconnected with a college acquaintance, and it became public. Is that correct? Lee nodded. Yes. I never thought my actions would come out and affect my family. Dr. Price continued. Then why go out with Mr. Johnson, knowing he's famous? Lee sighed. I thought it would be fun. It wasn't near the hotel, and it was fun. But you knew your coworkers would talk and Marty would find out, Dr. Price said. Lee nodded silently. Dr. Price turned to me. Marty, why do you believe the marriage can't be saved? I looked at Lee. She was the person I trusted most, and she betrayed me so easily and publicly. I've experienced loss before, but this pain is worse. I could never trust her, or anyone, again. Lee began to cry, and Dr. Price asked, How do you feel seeing her so upset? Sad and angry, I admitted. What she did was cruel. Not just to me, but to the kids, too. Even if it wasn't intentional, it was reckless. And for what? 3 nights with someone you were infatuated with back in college, I said, fixing my gaze on Lee. Through her tears, Lee said, I don't know why I did it. Dr. Price interjected. Did you have feelings for him in college? Yes, Lee said quietly. He was handsome and popular. He pursued me, but I was with Marty, so I turned him down. Why did you say yes in Miami? I asked, my voice strained. I had been feeling disconnected for months. We were all so busy. When I saw Larry, he hugged me, and I didn't push him away. Everything happened so fast. I don't fully understand it myself, Lee confessed. I scoffed. We had amazing sex the night before you left. Was that all fake? No, it was real, Lee said, her voice breaking. I felt excited on the flight. I feel awful about everything. She started sobbing again. I felt tears welling up, but anger took over, and I left the room. Dr. Price found me in the outer office. Why don't you step into the men's room for a moment, she suggested. I did and returned 15 minutes later. Lee, now calmer, said softly, I'm sorry, Marty, before leaving. Dr. Price turned to me. Marty, how do you feel about Mr. Johnson's end of life? You were there, weren't you? Yes, I saw him die. I felt relieved. It's dark to say, but I could have done it myself. Someone else did, and that felt like a weight lifted, I said bluntly. Why does this mean the end for you? She asked. I was always devoted to my family. This betrayal is too much to bear. I can't picture trusting anyone again. Lee took that from me. Have you thought about what their time together was like? Dr. Price pressed. Yes. I saw the videos. It was clear how much they wanted each other, I said coldly. How did that make you feel? Betrayed, I said, my voice hard. It wasn't just a meaningless fling. Even if we stayed together, I'd always believe she was thinking of him. I wish I could erase those memories for her, if nothing else. Dr. Price sighed. That's hard to overcome. You truly loved her. I did. That's why it hurts so much. She destroyed me, I said. The session ended with Dr. Price asking me to consider living arrangements if we were to separate.
I was tasked with explaining what happened in Miami, why I was so vulnerable, and outlining how reconciliation with Marty might be possible. Before the Miami trip, I felt disconnected and out of touch with the things I used to enjoy. Work had become monotonous, and family life felt repetitive. This had been going on for months, leaving me with an underlying sense of dissatisfaction. I looked forward to the trip, hoping it would bring some change. One of my colleagues, Brady Bean, had been pestering me since he transferred to our office. I easily brushed him off, treating him as an annoyance, but he was persistent. While he wasn't unattractive and had an upbeat personality, I was never interested. When we realized we were both going to Miami, he saw it as a chance for a fling. I made it clear I wasn't interested, though I couldn't deny that his attention was somewhat flattering. Still, I would never cross that line with him. He wasn't tempting enough, and it was too risky. Everything changed when we arrived at the hotel. Larry appeared. He was undeniably attractive, muscular, smooth, and self-assured. When he hugged me enthusiastically, I was instantly caught off guard. I realized that if he pursued me, I wouldn't resist. He seemed to pick up on that, pulling me aside to ask if Marty was with me. When I said no, he mentioned his hotel room and his stay until Friday. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "I want you, and I know you want me." I agreed to have dinner with him, though even now I can't fully understand why I was so willing, like a fool. Marty and I had just had amazing sex the night before I left. I was still feeling its effects, yet being with Larry felt like stepping into another world. I told myself it was only for a few days, far from home with no real consequences. I didn't think about Marty or the fallout. At least, I don't remember considering it. If Larry had been in Virginia, I'm sure I would have said no. But in Miami, I convinced myself it was different. During dinner, it was obvious where the night was heading. We skipped dessert and went straight to his room. Once inside, Larry pulled me close and kissed me, and we quickly undressed. I wasn't thinking about anything except his touch, his body, and the desire between us. There was no build-up. We were too eager. He carried me to the bed, and we had sex, intense and relentless. After multiple climaxes, he finished, and I passed out. He woke me up with kisses, and we started again. I missed breakfast with my team the next morning and barely made it to the meeting. I was thoroughly satisfied and suspected my colleagues could tell. Some gave me sidelong glances, but no one said anything directly. I wondered if anyone might contact Marty, but dismissed it. They had no proof, just guesses. The second night was as intense, though by the third night the excitement had waned. Still, we had dinner in his room and spent hours in bed. Larry suggested going out dancing, and I hesitated before agreeing. That's how I ended up on YouTube, dancing with him. When I watched the video later, knowing Marty had seen it, I felt sick. I saw myself the way Marty must have, his devoted wife, publicly showing desire for another man. After dancing, we returned to the hotel and had sex again. The next morning, I had a flight back home. We had one final round before saying goodbye. When I returned to my room to pack, my roommate, Cindy, mentioned the YouTube video, calling it spicy. I was overcome with horror and realized I was finished. At the airport, I saw Bart Kovach, Marty's close friend. He told me that Marty had seen the video and knew I'd spent my nights with Larry. I was stunned. The flight home was miserable. No one spoke to me. When we landed, I didn't expect Marty to pick me up and waited for a taxi. Larry ended up in the same cab. He apologized for the video, saying he hadn't considered the consequences. I didn't want to talk and asked the driver to drop him off first. When I arrived home, I couldn't make myself go inside. When Marty opened the door, the hurt and anger on his face were too much. I turned and ran. Since then, I've been living at my parents' house, mostly in a daze. I tried speaking to my daughters, but Betsy rejected me and I couldn't blame her. Phone calls were easier, though it took me an hour to prepare for each one. I now go to counseling. After the first session, I felt certain my marriage was over, especially after hearing Marty's pain. His anger and grief were overwhelming, and I don't know how I could ever ask for his trust again. I don't deserve it. Larry is dead, liquidated by a car. When my mom told me, I felt immense sorrow. He had asked me to call him during the taxi ride, but I never did. Now I never could. His end of life left an emptiness inside me. I thought if I ever cheated, I would always remember Larry. Now maybe I won't. I can't shake the guilt that if I'd turned him down, he might still be alive. It doesn't make sense, but somehow it does. I'm completely, utterly lost.
Things at home are slowly improving. The twins are struggling with school, but it's manageable. Betsy stays angry, while Linda misses her mother deeply. I suspect Betsy does too, though she hides it well. Each evening, they video call Lee. She seems a bit better on these calls, but it's hard to tell much in such a short time. Our second counseling session was like the first, except we each had a solo session before meeting together. Dr. Price started with, "Have you thought about what could make reconciliation possible?" I sighed. "Yes, but I couldn't think of anything. Sorry." She pressed on. "Would understanding why Lee got involved with Larry help you trust her again? If you knew the cause, could you find a way to prevent it from happening again?" "That's absurd," I said. "She just wanted Zex with him and thought she'd get away with it." "That's what she said, right?" "But I don't believe her. Sure, she wanted him, but part of me thinks she wanted to get caught." "Why do you think that?" Dr. Price asked. "Good question. Ask her, Doc. But it doesn't matter. This won't end in reconciliation. You can't overcome a betrayal like this. It wasn't just the act. It was the stupidity of thinking she'd get away with it. That can't be fixed." Dr. Price paused. "If she did want to get caught, could that change anything for you?" "No," I said bitterly. "It would mean she wanted out. Away from me, from our family. Maybe she craved drama or excitement. If Larry were still alive, she'd probably be with him now." When we met together, Lee kept asking for forgiveness. I didn't believe it. Even if her apology was sincere and her actions made sense, I couldn't stay with her. It would be like living next to a ticking bomb, always waiting for it to go off again. By the end of the session, I'd made my decision. I called my lawyer and asked him to file for divorce. There was no other way.
Today, I was served divorce papers. I keep writing in this journal, hoping for future clarity. During this week's counseling, Marty seemed less angry, more resigned. It was clear we were done. I've read about grief stages, and acceptance is one of the last. Marty has accepted our marriage is over, with my affair as the final blow. The divorce papers didn't surprise me. I saw this coming. Now, I need to contact a lawyer. I returned to work this week, and the atmosphere was cold. Everyone knows about my affair and sees me as the woman who broke her family. Even Brady Bean, who once pursued me, has kept his distance. It's his loss. I know he'll probably approach me, assuming I'm vulnerable, but he's wrong. My lawyer suggested I ask for joint custody of the girls. Since Marty owned the house before our marriage, he'll likely stay there, especially as the main parent. The girls might live with us on alternate weeks if I find a place nearby, or maybe we'll switch weekends. It all feels overwhelmingly sad. I told my lawyer I'd admit to the Miami affair and asked him to speed up the process. I don't want anything from Marty. No money or prolonged fights. We can split the savings evenly. It's painful that years of marriage have come to this. Just broken memories. But at least I didn't end up like Larry. I don't feel sorry for him. He shares the blame. He didn't have to choose me, but he did. I'll never understand why. Dr. Price suggested my dancing, overtly strange behavior, and inability to hide the affair might mean I wanted an exciting new life. I don't believe that. She said Marty thought I wanted to be caught, to escape our marriage. Now I'm free, and I hate it. I have no appetite, no interest in Zex. I don't go out and have turned down Brady Bean multiple times without temptation. It would be easy, but I can't do it. I wonder how long this emptiness will last.
The divorce was finalized today. I received primary custody of the twins who will stay in the house. Lee will have them every other weekend, 2 weeks in the summer, and either Thanksgiving or Christmas. They'll probably get double gifts for Christmas. The settlement has been unchanged for 6 months, as Lee already rented an apartment 2 miles away. I invited Milt and Ellen to visit anytime, and they often do. They also see the girls at Lee's on weekends. I haven't dated seriously, but have gone out with a few divorced friends from our circle, sharing dinners or bowling nights. We spent a week at the house without the kids and were intimate. The Zex was good, but I made it clear to them that after what I've been through, there would be no commitment. Everyone knows what happened, so they understand. A few people believe I'll eventually move past my fears, but I doubt it. This is a long journey without an endpoint. The pain of imagining Lee with Larry is still as sharp as ever, though I try not to dwell on it. The twins have adapted. Linda is kind to Lee, but Betsy holds grudges like me, which might be a problem. I've only shared this concern with Ellen, not Lee. Lee and I barely speak. She knows I prefer it that way. Seeing her is too painful. Ellen mentions that Lee has become reclusive, and I rarely see her. Despite living close and sharing social circles, I don't feel sympathy for her and never will. I never understood why she did it, and I doubt she does either. It seemed like a coincidence of events, her vague discontent, the trip to Miami, and meeting Larry, all aligning to destroy our marriage. A year later, Milt Moore played golf on a Saturday with his old friend, Fred Cunningham, an electrical engineer. As they walked from the 9th hole, they spoke in low tones. "How are you holding up, Fred?" Milt asked. Fred nodded slowly. "I'm doing okay. I agreed to follow through as planned, and everything unfolded just like you said it would. He always played golf on Saturdays, even after retirement. It was routine for him. I felt a pang when I saw the news about him running into the street. It was a tough call, but I did what needed to be done. Your horn startled him, and it shocked me too." Milt nodded, a serious look on his face. "It went smoother than I expected, almost as if it was meant to be. I couldn't believe it when he died," Fred continued. "I called emergency, and Marty was there. Later, he said he felt cheated. I wanted him to witness it for closure," Milt said. "He had a tool, and I was worried he might do something drastic. My granddaughters deserved a normal life, and if Marty had been arrested, it would have been because of Lee. Did Larry deserve to die? Hard to say. But Marty and the girls deserved to move on and live." They never spoke about it again, walking side by side down the path.